welcome to a new episode of Hello World. Today we're going to have the opportunity to visit the shipping industry. So, like many of you, we've heard about the emission discussion regarding airplanes polluting the air and so on, and now we all have the opportunity to CO2 compensate actually when we buy tickets and purchase that. But I don't think anybody is as familiar with the shipping industry. And of course, there is a lot of emissions within the shipping industry today as well. So we're going to meet Greg Atkinson, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Echo Marine Power today. And Fredrik, you actually met him many years ago. How did you meet?
Yeah, actually Greg hired me as a sub-project manager when they were starting building UMTS 3G network in Japan. So he was my manager for almost 2 years actually. So I moved there and met him for the first time there, and we have been working there together. Yeah. So why not just welcome Greg to our Hello World. Hi Greg.
Hello, nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Nowadays, it feels like you don't have an ordinary job. You are on a mission, or what you could say. Can you tell us a little bit more about your job you have today?
Yeah, so what we did is we started off as a design organization, and the idea was to investigate ways of reducing fuel consumption on ships. And in the beginning, it was very technical, and we were looking at engines and engine power, speed curves, etc. But I guess out of that study, we started to look at renewable energy and thinking about how renewable energy could be applied to shipping, and how we could utilize that to reduce fuel consumption. And then if you lower fuel consumption, then you lower emissions. And then from there, it just expanded. It just expanded into a number of different studies, and then we started a company, and then we started to move products out.
Nice. But how did you end up in the shipping industry? Because I know you have a background there as well.
Yeah, it was like a 360, I guess. I started in the Navy in electronics engineering, and then I went into telecoms, and then just by a twist of fate, I come back to shipping. Okay. So it's like a 360, I guess.
Back to the roots.
Yes, back to the future.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that environmental concerns are actually not, I mean, they are important, but that's not the only reason why you're doing what you're doing, but it's also really important to reduce the emissions out of health concerns. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so at the beginning, it was actually more of a health concern issue. So the fumes from shipping, or the exhaust from shipping, is got a lot of particulate matter in, and it's bad for health. I think the estimate, or one estimate, is that there's about 60,000 premature deaths a year due to shipping emissions. I think it's something like about 200 or 300 million people are directly or indirectly exposed to shipping emissions, and of course, black carbon and particulate matter gets into your lungs, so it's not good for health. And that's where we started. We actually started more from a health background. But of course, now over the years, there's been more focus on CO2 and global warming. So it's now a combination of both. It's a health issue, and it's also an environmental issue. So, shipping, I think, uses somewhere in the vicinity of about 300 million tons of fuel, heavy fuel a year. So it's a lot of fuel, and it's a lot of emissions.
Yeah. Indeed.
I mean, we don't live in a harbor. Well, we have a harbor actually, but it's not sort of considered as a harbor town. But do you feel like, are people aware about the risk? I'm meaning more citizens actually in sort of cities or areas that are close to big harbors. Are they aware of the sort of the danger that might be in that sense?
I think to some extent, but generally shipping is out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. Unless you see a cruise ship, or you see a big cargo ship coming in, I guess most people don't even think about shipping.
No.
And it's probably one of the reasons that it was a bit off the regulation radar, because it's sort of out of sight. The emissions, they're sort of out in the ocean. But, in the last few years, there's been a lot more focus on it.
Yeah.
Cool. Eco Marine Power, the company where you are working, what are you doing to solve these problems, both with health and pollution?
So our primary focus is to try to reduce fuel consumption. And then if you reduce fuel consumption, you reduce emissions. Initially, we were looking at solar to take some of that reduction. We've moved more into wind now. So we're trying to use a system of rigid sails. We also investigate energy storage and fuel cells. And we're trying to develop a framework or a pathway that will start off with fuel reduction, but hopefully then end up with what we could call zero emission ships. So that would be a ship that's powered by renewable energy and fuel cells and maybe some other technologies.
Okay. But how far have you come into that vision?
Yeah, so we've just moved out 2 or 3 systems using solar and energy storage onto ships. The sail system or array of sails that we've developed are going through the approval process now. And, we're looking at somewhere like 2021, maybe 2022 to have the full solution ready.
Okay.
That's cool.
Sure.
So what would you say are sort of the main challenges with implementing what you're doing? I'm assuming that, shippers don't buy new ships every day and every year even. So sort of what are the main challenges and how long would you say it's going to take to reach some sort of scale on this?
Okay, so one of the big challenges is just the industry itself is fairly conservative. So that it's not an industry that will necessarily be leaping towards new technologies. In the past, the cost of fuel's also been quite low. So there hasn't been a real financial incentive for them to invest in these technologies because they can get heavy fuel oil at about $400 a ton. But recently this has started to change and the regulations are coming in. The International Maritime Organization is moving a lot of policy initiatives through. There's the sulfur limits on fuel, and it's, I guess, gradually pushing the industry towards using these technologies. But certainly the biggest barrier, I would say, over the last few years is just the conservative nature and the lack of a cost incentive.
Yeah. So are there more companies than yours working with sort of looking into these kind of technologies to find new ways of sort of, do shipping but without using fuel in the same way that we've done before?
Yeah, there's quite a few companies now moving into this. And some of the big shipping companies like Maersk have just announced that they're going to set up an R&D center for zero emission shipping. So there is quite a big shift going on. A lot of this is coming, a push from, the Paris Agreement and regulations, but also it's good to see that some of the big shipping companies are stepping up and pushing this along as well.
Yeah. So how long do you think it's going to take before you sort of have a scalable solution where we're actually going to see a difference? Because I assume it's not enough that 1 ship or 2 ships have it, but actually the industry needs to sort of change as such.
Yeah, that's right. Realistically, I think it's going to take a decade before you'll see a big shift. And we've just had this virus outbreak, which is totally decimated, sectors like the cruise ship industry. They're in a lot of pain. They're losing millions, hundreds of millions a month. Other shipping companies are also under a lot of trouble. So this is going to delay things. So, I'd say realistically, it's going to take a decade, I think, before you see a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay. I only had the possibility to live in Japan for 2 years and started to understand the cultural difference there. You as an Australian, have been living there for more than 20 years. What is needed for a foreigner to succeed in Japan? Because I think we can say that you actually have succeeded quite well.
Yeah, well, when it comes to cultural issues, I think I'm still struggling with them. So, there's some things that I just don't get. I think you just need a fair bit of patience. And one of the things that I would say, and I don't want to generalize, of course, but it's very relationship based in Japan. It's not like a quick exchange of a business card and then business starts. Sometimes it takes quite some time. Some of the partner companies I've been working with, it took years to establish that relationship and trust. So, I'd say patience. And I think the other golden rule whenever you talk about cultural issues is just because someone does something different doesn't mean they're doing it wrong, or doesn't mean there's not some sort of logic behind what they're doing. And I think if you approach any culture or any situation like that, you've got to get a lot further than sort of trying to push back or, thinking it's just the wrong way to do things.
I have the feeling of that the Japanese industry and way of working is very strategic, and they have a long, their vision is quite far away. They don't do things quickly, but they do things well.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, a good example, and the one that I often use, is high-speed rail. So, Japan started working on the Shinkansen or the high-speed rail probably in the mid-50s, which is decades ahead of anyone else. They then launched it in 1964 or thereabouts, and then it was only probably a decade after that they started on the maglev. And the maglev train, I think, is going to come in at about 2030. So it's a huge, multi-decade thought process of starting in the mid-50s and just keep going, all that way to the maglev. And that's a long strategic thought process by anyone's standard.
Indeed. Yeah.
But how far would you say that Japan has come in terms of sort of digital transformation?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a hard thing to say. I mean, I have a home office with an unlimited 1 gigabit per second broadband connection. So on that side of things, it's quite advanced. There are some other areas where there's a little bit of paperwork and involved, and some of the cashless payments is a bit behind, but it's starting to pick up now. But yeah, it varies. I mean, overall, I'd say it's quite advanced, but on an engineering side, I always get the impression it's a bit more hardware focused than software focused. But Fredrik would know more about that than me. He's more of a software guy.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I have been working for a long time at Sony as well, so I must say they are really, really skilled in the hardware part, definitely. And as a Swede, I think the merge there where we are quite good in software here in Sweden. I think that's a good merge, actually.
Yeah.
Right.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for taking the time to join us and let us look into the shipping industry. I think it's quite fascinating to think that we're going to have ships that have sails that are sort of even more driven by wind than the original old ones, I guess, and solar power and so on. Maybe it's even back to the old days, but in a futuristic way. Could you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. It's like a lot of things. I mean, with most renewables, we're sort of relearning, sort of how to use things that we used in the past. So, yeah, that's a good way of expressing it. We're sort of using old technologies or old methods in a new way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, impressive.
So thank you so much and enjoy your day.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's actually interesting how we come back to the roots.
Yeah, I think how we did things for centuries. I think there are some wise things that have been made before as well.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. But we're using technology to make it smarter and better and more efficient. So
Yeah,
it's
indeed.
kind of a good combination, I guess.
Yeah, a good improvement.
Perfect. So thank you for joining us today, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.